Welcome to Daily Coronavirus-Driven Mind Stuff. My name is George Ortega, and this series was formerly titled Talking to Ourselves During Coronavirus Distancing. But fortunately, I've got some good news. It didn't work out the way I had intended. I intended to kind of basically demonstrate the benefits of talking to oneself, mainly by example. And after a couple of episodes, after the first episode, really, I realized that was not, something that was really possible. So, we've got a new theme, a new format, a new title. And again, it's daily coronavirus-driven mind stuff. It's kind of like what this time we're in is evoking in, at least, in me. It probably be mirroring a lot of thoughts and feelings that you're having. So, all right, let's start. Basically, I want to start with actually what happens after we get back to relative normality. Because, whether it's in several months or, longer if it need be, hopefully it's sooner, but whenever it is, I imagine that most of us are not going to want to revisit this time, not just in this country, but throughout the world. And I think I'm going to devote this episode to how we make that happen, because you're not hearing it in the news. You're not hearing it from our politicians. You're not hearing it in the news media. And it's just really important to understand. So I've gone through this, I think, in both of the last episodes, but it's so important that I may go over it over and over, to try to really, have it sink in. So, all right. So basically, this influenza pandemic, this coronavirus pandemic, is a result of a disease being transferred from an animal to a human. Okay, now in this case, it may have been a bat to an animal at the wet market in China. But we here in the United States have had various outbreaks of bird flu. It's something that's common to the world today, and what we have to really acknowledge and fully appreciate is that it comes from our farming domesticated animals, cows, chickens, pigs, and it's not a danger that is only limited to the big farms. This is a danger that even in a small farm, for example, let's say you have a pig farm, a small local pig farm. It's not an industrial farm. Well, let's say a bat, just flies over the pigsty and just happens to infect one of those pigs. That could cause another pandemic. So that's, so basically I think after, we're only into this several weeks. Italy's been into it several months, so has China. And, I think after this is done, I think we'll all agree that we want to do as much as possible to just be sure that it doesn't happen again, that something like this never happens again. So, all right, there's two ways to go about that. And I think both should probably be pursued very, very aggressively. But I think one may be much, much easier to succeed with than the other. So the first one, that's a possibility, but it really, based on our medicine, our technology, may be a decade or two away from us. And that's the idea that we would create a universal vaccine that would not only protect us from the seasonal flu, because we go to we get a flu shot each year because they determine that there's 5 or 6 different strains of flu that they predict will be the most contagious that year, and we get vaccinated against them. It doesn't vaccinate us against all the strains. That's why 30 to about 20 to 30,000 people die of flus every year here in the United States, and many more across the world. So basically we would need a vaccine that's universal, that just like wouldn't allow any kind of influenza flu to affect us. Again, that would be a wonderful solution, but that, I believe, is decades out. Nonetheless, I think we should be investing, we just invested $2.2 trillion in the economic stimulus package. I don't know how much of that money was devoted to this research on such a vaccine, but if it should have been like 20, 30, 40 billion dollars, out of 2.2 trillion. You have to, you can't just address the symptoms of something like this. You have to address it at the very root of it. Okay, so let's get back to where we are though. The other way that we have to really very effectively protect us. I mean, 98, 99%, I would guess, effectiveness. There may be, a rare kind of like an instance where a pandemic might happen again, but we would be so much safer. And that is to basically transition away from factory farming. Okay. Now, and just the farming of all animals. And essentially, I think what I'm saying is like to stop eating meat that comes from animals. Now, like, you're what this show is I think mainly about is something that most people have no idea exists yet because it's so new. Back in 2013, I'm going to repeat this, over probably in various episodes because it's so important. Back in 2013, Mark Post, a doctor from the Netherlands, just basically demonstrated to the world that it is possible to grow meat, in his case beef, in a way that doesn't harm any animals, because from a religious perspective, you might want to think that this coronavirus might be God's way of punishing us for how we're treating these animals, because it's horrible. You wouldn't believe it. But so he in 2013 demonstrated to the world, yes, it is possible. And so since then, over 40 startups have been created by people wanting to create beef, chicken, fish, eggs, milk in laboratories in a way that doesn't harm any animals. And here's the thing relative to this coronavirus crisis that we're in. This method of growing our meat and dairy and eggs completely outside of the animal virtually essentially eliminates this risk of pandemic influenza diseases. I mean, it does so much more than this. For example, like in factory farms, we have to feed our livestock many, many more pounds, tons, I don't know how much it is, but like much more antibiotics than actually we humans take, because the conditions are so filthy, so rife for disease. That's the only way they can keep these animals healthy. So the problem with that is that to the extent we do that, these antibiotics become less and less effective as the bacteria that we're trying to protect against mutates and becomes more virulent, and so our antibiotics don't work anymore. So that alone should be reason enough to transition from farming animals for our meat, dairy, and eggs to this lab-grown method. Okay, so just briefly, most people would think, well, it's unnatural. No, it's actually very natural. It's completely natural. What they do is they take a cell, a single cell from a cow or a chicken or a fish, and then they trick it into believing that it's still in the animal. They put it into a medium of growth of the nutrients it needs to grow and to replicate and duplicate itself. And that's really what it is. It's basically growing the same meat that generally grows in the animal, outside of the animal. And Winston Churchill, actually back, I think in 1931, spoke about this. He predicted in the future we wouldn't, go through this extremely inefficient method of growing an entire animal just to grow the meat. He predicted we'd be able to grow the meat, outside of the animal, and again, that's, I was pretty prescient of him. And then, so like, in 1931, he realized what in 2013, we finally achieved. So, all right, now let me just go from that to the politics. Now, as I said, there's 40 to 50 startups that are working on this. And basically it's research. They know how to do this in a lab, but they have to solve a few research challenges to scale up, to go from growing a little meat in a lab to growing tons and tons of meat. And again, those tons of meats can all be derived from that single cell. No animals are harmed. Not a single animal is harmed in this process. So basically, these startups are not very well funded, and because of that, experts in the industry predicted at this rate of investment, it may take over a decade to have these products in supermarkets. Now we may get lucky. We may get lucky that in several years, in let's say 5 years, they will have basically solved these research problems. But the problem is, for example, like one of the most successful of these startups just received a B round funding of $156 million. Okay, and the industry, is really elated about that. But think about it, $156 million compared to $2.2 trillion that we just spent on the effects, not even the cure, not even prevention, really, the effects of this current coronavirus influenza pandemic. So, and so like, it boggles the mind that our politicians are so uninformed about this, what I'm referring to is called cultured meat, it's called clean meat, it's called lab-grown meat, it's called in vitro meat. It has various names, it's a brand new industry. But think about it, investing $2.2 trillion on trying to salvage the economic cost of this coronavirus without spending a penny on this research, this research that could realistically, within 3, 4, 5 years, solve for us this problem of pandemics. I mean, like, it's in my view, it's completely irresponsible that the politicians don't know about this and haven't invested this. So what I'm proposing is that there are other stimulus packages that are in the works right now. This was the third stimulus, or I think the fourth stimulus third stimulus package was the 2 trillion. There may be a fourth and a fifth and a sixth. It depends on how long this goes. But what I'm proposing is that in the next stimulus package or the one after that, because I think what's going to happen is as people, live through this, fortunately, and think to themselves, my God, let's not ever have this happen again. People are going to look for answers, and that's when people are going to demand this money. So, I would say at least $10 billion of this next or the following stimulus package should be devoted to this research. It could be conducted in universities, labs. It could be conducted by these 40 to 50 startups. And if that $10 billion were released, those 40 to 50 startups, I imagine, would grow to 100, 200, 300 startups, which would probably fast track the whole process. So what happens is that you have a lot more researchers working on this problem. They have a lot more resources by which to work on the problem. And really, I think it would be much, much more likely than within 2, 3, perhaps 4 years at the most, we will have solved this pandemic problem for the entirety of humanity. Because it's not just this country. You think of all the countries in the world, this is like, this is affecting every country, and it's like, it's wreaking havoc on our economics. It's just unemploying so many people. It's killing a lot of people. So this series is going to be about other things. This is a serious show, this episode. And again, I'm going to revisit this because this is so important. I will talk about different topics related to coronavirus, but this is essential. In other words, like right now, so many of us are stuck at home, and many of us aren't able to work because our work, is non-essential. So we're basically not doing much, and we have time. And so some people might think, well, now is not the time to consider how to prevent these pandemics. Now is the time to deal with this one. But, fine, government officials and doctors and, the healthcare system has to address what's happening now. The economists have to address what's happening now. But again, so many of us have time to do this research, to learn, like Google clean meat. There's a book out by Paul Shapiro called Clean Meat that I think it was published in 2018. And it chronicles the history of this very new revolutionary milestone in human development. Really, creating meat from labs rather than animals is going to change the world in such a wonderful way. I mean, religiously, again, I'm religious. I believe in God. I believe that this coronavirus is, yes, God telling us, hey, enough with the torturing of these animals. But animal meat hurts us in so many other ways. For example, the number one cause of death here in the United States is heart disease. The number one cause of heart disease is eating meat. And there are many diseases that come from eating dairy and eggs. And there are many diseases that come from the pathogens that are essentially unavoidable. Salmonella, E. coli, the various kinds of pathogens that are in our food system. And we sometimes have to recall a lot of meat, a lot of vegetables, because they get infected in this way. And so this new research, this new way of growing meat would also eliminate that threat. Okay. So again, at least $10 billion of the next or the next after that stimulus package should be devoted to this research. And it's not just that, it's like people should know about it. The New York Times, Time Magazine, The Guardian, all these papers are beginning to publish articles explaining to us how our food system, our factory farm system, is a breeding ground for future pandemics and for for making our antibiotics much less effective. It's a serious problem. They're beginning to alert the public, but I follow this daily in the news. Not a one is making this connection well. We have this problem, and the best way to solve it, barring a universal vaccine that's probably decades away, is to fund, to perfect this this way of growing meat in labs, this cultured meat. Now, the meat industry is going to object, but hey, we have to find jobs for a lot of people that lost their jobs now. I mean, we would help people in the meat industry to transition to other jobs that don't place, all of humanity at risk of, I mean, this could be far worse. I don't know if most people know, but like the Spanish flu of 1918 killed over 50 million people. It killed more people than World War II killed. So, I mean, with this coronavirus, the reason why everyone's locked down in existence is because it's so virulent. It passes from person to person, even when a person isn't exhibiting symptoms. That's one of the dangers of it. So, all right, I've got about 6 minutes left. Talk about it. Again, research it, clean meat on the web. There's actually going to be a documentary that's coming out, I think, in May. I think it's going to premiere, I think maybe in Canada. I believe it may be being produced by a Canadian filmmaker. But I have a feeling, if this doesn't persuade people to make that investment, and it should be tens of billions of dollars. Again, we just spent $2.2 trillion to mitigate, to deal with the effect of just one of these pandemics. And this is just one country, the United States. I don't know how much other countries are spending on their economies, but like, it makes absolutely no sense to spend so much money on dealing with a threat like this without literally spending any money, because I haven't heard of a single penny of that stimulus money being devoted to this kind of research. It's beyond understanding. So if you've got time, let's say you're not working now, learn about this. The wiki has some information on it. There's different videos. If you go to the Google video and type in clean meat or cultured meat or in vitro meat, they have like some videos are like 5 minutes long, some videos are like 20 minutes long, and different people talk you through the process of how this is done, how safe it is, why it's important to, and this even, it's kind of an aside, but it's such an important aside. Most people don't realize that the livestock industry, growing animals in these factory farms, emits more man-made greenhouse gases than the entire transportation industry combined. Planes, trains, trucks, cars, growing livestock emits more greenhouse gases than entire transportation. And it also consumes so much land and so much water. Growing meat in labs would be so much more ecologically sustainable. It would take so much less energy, less land, less water, less resources. So I mean, this idea is so powerful, and it's time. It's time that our politicians begin to talk about it. And I think I don't think it's too early to talk about this, because right now people are afraid. They're not just afraid for the present. I think people are afraid for the future. People are thinking to themselves, oh my God, are we gonna have to worry about this next year and the year after and the year after that? Because right now we're dealing with coronavirus, this COVID-19. And it's, even though it's highly contagious, it's not all that lethal. It is killing a lot of people, but like compared to other diseases that we've battled and fortunately won against, this coronavirus is relatively mild. Now, the danger is that, let's say, a coronavirus like this mutates with, develops the characteristics of one of these very, very deadly influenza viruses. So then you have a virus that's both extremely contagious and extremely lethal. That could spell, the deaths of hundreds of millions of people throughout the world. And we want to avoid that. We want to basically, we want to create a world where people don't have to worry about this anymore. Fine, we have to worry about climate change. We have to worry about many other kinds of dangers in our world. We have to get things better. But to not have to worry about something like this, I mean, this is, this is surreal. I mean, everybody is locked up in their apartments and their homes. We can't go out. We're wearing masks. It's beyond surreal. So now is the time to think about how we're going to prevent these pandemics from happening in the future. Now is the time to think about, you know, how much money we have to spend and how we're going to spend it. And now is the time for the media to give us hope. You know, fine, we have to deal with the, you know, disinfecting our food and wearing masks and distancing and all that. Yes, we get that and we're doing it, fortunately, but let's address this very important part of the problem. That is, so that we can create a world where this never happens again. Again, you had to talk to Google clean meat, cultured meat, learn about it, then call your representatives. Call your representatives, call your senators, call your governors, you know, call the politicians that, call the media organizations, you know, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they should be covering this. They should be covering this as a way to, at least, you know, in this very difficult time, say, there is hope for the future. We don't have to, you know, once we get over this, we may create a world where we never have to experience this again. Okay, I've got about a minute left, and like, this is a new show, and like, ordinarily we have opening and closing tags, and like, I'm still working with the studio, so like, I'm gonna end this show, this episode immediately in about 39 seconds. But if I don't get the tags today, I'm not able to tag them. This episode is supposed to be cablecast tomorrow at 5 on White Plains Community Media, 5 p.m. But if I don't get it, so I'll just like add another minute of, you know, just, I guess, another imploring of what needs to be done. All right, so this is Ortega, George Ortega for Daily Coronavirus-Driven Mindscape, Mind Stuff, saying, you know, I'll see you next time. Okay, thanks. Okay, hey everyone. Apparently the studio wasn't able to create the opening and closing tags for this episode in time for it being cablecast tomorrow at 5. So I'm just doing another minute of recording. And again, let me just reiterate, we just spent $2.2 trillion on addressing the effect of this coronavirus. And the only way we're going to be safe from future viruses is to either develop a universal vaccine, which is probably 10, 20 years away, or to fund this clean meat that can protect us probably within 3, 4, 5 years. Okay, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.